Hello and welcome to Supposedly Fun. My name is Greg and I am here today to do a book haul and talk about all the books that I have brought into my library for the month of January. As always, I'm really excited about all of these books. Not a whole lot to talk about here, but I think the quality is pretty good. First, I want to give a quick shout out to Parnassus Books. The first book in this haul will actually be from this store. So if you're unfamiliar, Ann Patchett owns Parnassus Books in Nashville. I have never been there. I have always wanted to go, and I had been sort of holding out, hoping that someday I would be there in person. I broke down, I ordered a book this past month, and of course I can't order a book without asking, hey, do you have t-shirts? They do. I almost forgot to wear this today, so I had to change at the last minute and put it on because no way am I going to talk about a book I got from Parnassus without wearing the t-shirt. It's a great store, and just wanted to shout out the t-shirt. If you know me, you know I love a bookstore t-shirt. It's just my thing. Some people like concert tees. I like bookstore tees. I should also mention that I will have affiliate links to bookshop.org in the description box down below. If you are interested in any of these titles, you can use that link and it'll give me a little kickback. Otherwise, you can support your local independent bookstore, even if it's not local to you, because Parnassus is not anywhere local to me. Or you can request these titles at your local library. It's always good to support your local library. Anyway, let's get on with the book haul. So what book did I order from Parnassus? Well, of course, it was an Ann Patchett book. So here's the thing, though. The reason I decided, you know what, I'm just going to order something from them right now is because two of Ann Patchett's books were on a list of like 700 titles that were banned in the state of Florida. One of them was The Patron Saint of Liars, and the other one is Bel Canto. I had actually been hoping to order one or the other of those books to show support for banned books, which, you know, I support books that people challenge. They were sold out, which is great because clearly people are supporting those books. But I've always kind of wanted a copy of Tom Lake, so I ordered a copy of Tom Lake. And because Ann Patchett is the owner of Parnassus and she's there regularly, it's a signed book, which is just kind of fun. I asked, the person over the phone, by the way, was very friendly. So, you know, when people do good things, shout out the good things. Super friendly customer service. She was really kind, extremely efficient and helpful. So toward the end, though, I said, so I don't want to be, you know, complicated, but is a copy of Tom Lake signed? And she just kind of laughed and said, Ann signs everything that comes in the door. So we're good. And it came right away. It was great. So Tom Lake, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about. This is published by Harper. The reason I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about it is that if you follow along, you have heard about this book because I read it in August or September, somewhere around there, and I loved it. It ended up being one of my favorite reads of 2023. So I will link the video where Joel and I talk about our favorite reads of 2023 in the description box down below. You can check out that and get a lot more information from me about why I loved it so much. Joel actually just listened to this on audio because Meryl Streep reads the audio. Fun story about the cover, because I follow Parnassus Books on Instagram, and I love every time Ann Patchett talks about pretty much anything. She saw this painting when she was traveling while she was writing this book, and she immediately thought to herself, that's the cover of my book. But this is actually the way the painting goes. There's a portion of the painting that was left unpainted because the artist knew that there was going to be like a dresser of drawers that was going to go in front. So he just didn't paint that part of the canvas. So they were able to incorporate that into the book cover by making it the part where the title and the author name goes. Part of me wonders, because I can be so literal about things, why they didn't just keep it in this direction, because it would be really easy to just have Tom Lake by Ann Patchett right there. But hey, artistic license, it looks great. It's a beautiful cover. So I really enjoyed this book. I would recommend it. I just wanted to have a copy on my shelf because I liked it, and now Joel has read it, and it's a great book. Obviously, it was one of my favorites, and I have been an admirer of Parnassus Books for long enough that I've wanted to get something from them. And if I'm going to get a copy of an Ann Patchett book, I might as well order it from her store and make sure I get it signed. Really, I should do the same thing with Louise Erdrich because she owns a bookstore called Birch Bark in Minneapolis. So the next time she publishes a book, I might think about doing the same thing. If you're wondering what this is about, so it's set during the pandemic, but it's not a pandemic novel in the way you're thinking. Basically, the pandemic is almost like an excuse to get a family that has started going their separate ways all back in one location. The daughters, who are now in their at various points in their 20s, have come home to the cherry farm that they grew up on, and they are sheltering in place together. And there's sort of an acknowledgement this is probably the last time they are all going to be together before things at least significantly start to change, like husbands start to come into the equation, maybe children, things like that. It's the last time they will be together as the original unit of people, and it might start getting more difficult. And as they are together and picking cherries on the orchard, the daughters start getting the mother to tell them about her experience when she almost became an actress. She had some parts here and there. She played Emily in Our Town, I think 2 or 3 times. I can't remember at this point. And in one of those productions, she ended up dating someone who later became a famous actor. And the daughters love hearing the stories about this. So it's a little bit about the things that you hide from your children in order to make stories a little more palatable, and then things you'll tell them as time goes on and maybe reveal later. It's a really beautiful story. It's also about unexpected directions that your life can take and how some people might not necessarily understand the directions that your life took, because clearly if you had a chance to date someone who was a famous actor, or if you could have been an actress, how do you end up on a cherry farm in Michigan? It's a really beautiful book. I would absolutely, very highly recommend it if you have not already, especially the audio, because, as I said, Meryl Streep reads it, and she does a fantastic job. It's decorated to Kate DiCamillo. I have really liked books by Kate DiCamillo that I have read in the past, so just thought I would mention that. In my book hauls, I like to read a little bit from the opening, so I'm not Meryl Streep. You know that. But let's just do a little bit from the opening of Tom Lake by Ann Patchett. Chapter 1. That Veronica and I were given keys and told to come early on a frozen Saturday in April to open the school for the Our Town auditions was proof of our dull reliability. The play's director, Mr. Martin, was my grandmother's friend and State Farm agent. That's how I was wrangled in, through my grandmother, and Veronica was wrangled because we did pretty much everything together. Citizens of New Hampshire could not get enough of Our Town. We felt about the play the way other Americans felt about the Constitution or the Star-Spangled Banner. It spoke to us, made us feel special and seen. Mr. Martin predicted a large turnout for the auditions, which explained why he needed use of the school gym for the day. The community theater production had nothing to do with our high school, but seeing as how Mr. Martin was also the principal's insurance agent and very likely his friend, the request was granted. Ours was that kind of town. That's the opening of Tom Lake by Ann Patchett. I highly recommend it, and I'm very happy to have a copy on my bookshelves. Next is something I actually won in a contest on the Storygraph, and I'm really excited about. It's The Berry Pickers by Amanda Peters. This is published by Catapult, and it is a really beautiful cover. I'm also a huge fan of blueberries. I'm particularly a fan of huckleberries, which are a little, more rare, and certainly specific to the region where I live in the United States. But I'll take a blueberry all day. I love a blueberry, and that obviously means that the cover of this book just kind of makes me happy. So I'm a little bit selective about contests that I enter on things like Storygraph or on social media. I feel like if I'm going to enter, I kind of want it to be something that I'm actually interested in reading in case I win. So I don't always enter a lot, which means I don't really win a lot. But so this was a lovely surprise from Storygraph, who recently launched giveaways. So I'm very happy to have it here, and even happier that I got it as part of a giveaway. Let me read to you what this book is about, and I think you'll see why it sounds really interesting. A 4-year-old Micmac girl goes missing from the blueberry fields of Maine, sparking a tragic mystery that haunts the survivors, unravels a family, and remains unsolved for nearly 50 years. July 1962. Following in the tradition of indigenous workers from Nova Scotia, a Micmac family arrives in Maine to pick blueberries for the summer. Weeks later, 4-year-old Ruthie, the family's youngest child, vanishes. She is last seen by her 6-year-old brother, Joe, sitting on a favorite rock at the edge of a berry field. Joe will remain distraught by his sister's disappearance for years to come. In Maine, a young girl named Norma grows up as the only child of an affluent family. Her father is emotionally distant, her mother frustratingly overprotective. Norma is often troubled by recurring dreams and visions that seem more like memories than imagination. As she grows older, Norma slowly comes to realize there is something her parents aren't telling her. Unwilling to abandon her intuition, she will spend decades trying to uncover this family secret. For readers of The Vanishing Half and Woman of Light, this show-stopping debut by a vibrant new voice in fiction is a riveting novel about the search for truth, the shadow of trauma, and the persistence of love across time. I mean, it sounds interesting, right? Really looking forward to squeezing this in 2024. It has a map. If you follow along, you know I love a book with a map. So here we go, the beginning of The Berry Pickers. There's a prologue. I always am a little unsure. Do I do the prologue or do I jump to the first chapter? I'm going to jump to the first chapter in this case. Chapter 1 is called Joe. The day Ruthie went missing, the black flies seemed to be especially hungry. The white folks at the store where we got our supplies said that Indians made such good berry pickers because something sour in our blood kept the black flies away. But even then, as a boy of 6, I knew that wasn't true. Black flies don't discriminate. But now, lying here almost 50 years to the day and getting eaten from the inside out by a disease I can't even see, I'm not sure what's true and what's not anymore. Maybe we are sour. That is the opening of The Berry Pickers, a novel by Amanda Peters. Next is something that is adjacent to my Pulitzer Prize project. So, William Kennedy won a Pulitzer Prize for fiction for a book called Ironweed. Now, I'm doing a Pulitzer Prize project. I'm trying to read every book that has won a Pulitzer Prize for fiction. In cases where a book that won a Pulitzer is a book that was part of a series and there were books that were published before it, or if it's a sequel to something that had been published earlier, I would like to read the earlier books in the series. And Ironweed is part of it's a trilogy or a cycle. I can't remember what people call it, but the Albany trilogy, I believe. So the first installment of that series is called Legs, and then I think there's one in the middle called Billy Phelan's Greatest Game, and then Ironweed. So technically, I need to read 2 books before I read Ironweed. And I had been thinking about whether or not I wanted to attempt the first 2 books on audio. I might have to do Billy Phelan's Greatest Game on audio because I have had no luck seeing any copies of that anywhere. But I saw Legs at my local used bookstore, so I decided to pick it up because I would like to try to read the earlier books in the series before I get to Ironweed as part of my project. I've heard great things about Ironweed. I hear less so about the earlier books, but people do still like the Albany trilogy. So, here is the description of Legs. Legs inaugurated William Kennedy's brilliant cycle of novels, including Billy Phelan's Greatest Game and Ironweed, set in Albany, New York. True to both life and myth, Legs brilliantly evokes the flamboyant career of the legendary gangster Jack Legs Diamond, who was finally murdered in Albany. Through the equivocal eyes of Diamond's attorney, Marcus Gorman, who scraps a promising political career for the more elemental excitement of the criminal underworld, we watch as Legs and his showgirl mistress, Kiki Roberts, blaze their gaudy trail across the tabloid pages of the 1920s and 1930s. Diamond and his gangster entourage emerge as emblematic figures from an era of American innocence and corruption. That is the description of Legs by William Kennedy. I don't know if I'll get to this year, but I am happy to have it. But since it is adjacent to my Pulitzer Prize project, and since I do want to at least attempt to read the earlier books in the series. The opening of the book is Jack's alive, and it begins. I really don't think he's dead, I said to my 3 very old friends. You what? Said Patrick Delaney, dropsical now, and with only 4 teeth left. Elephantiasis had taken over his legs, and now one thigh was the size of 2. Ah, time. Let's stop there. That's an interesting enough opening for Legs from William Kennedy. Then, another book I have been wanting to read for a long time from a Pulitzer Prize author, someone who is in the Pulitzer Prize family of authors, and I just haven't gotten around to. And I've been keeping an eye out in my local used bookstore because I feel like this is something I would want to read in print rather than on audio. Year of Wonders by Geraldine Brooks. Because basically, my local used bookstore pretty much always has copies of this book, but usually they're pretty banged up. And I told myself, if I'm going to get a copy of the book, I want to wait until they have one that's in good condition. And sure enough, eventually this book, which is in good condition, came in, and since it's the same price as the ones that are pretty banged up, so I got a nicer edition for the same price. This is subtitled A Novel of the Plague. And as a bonus, one of the prompts for Montana Book Company's 2024 reading challenge is to read a book by an author with the same initials as you. So my initials are GB, Geraldine Brooks. It's such an easy answer. It took me a while to think of it, but as soon as I did, I was sold. So I could either reread March for my Pulitzer Prize project, or I could read Year of Wonders just for fun. You know, it didn't occur to me that pandemic is actually a subtle theme in that it pops up in at least two of the books, Tom Lake and this, which is not current pandemic, obviously, it's Black Plague. But yeah, I've heard so many good things about Year of Wonders, and I have not ever read it, so I would like to get around to it. This is published by Penguin. Here's the description. When an infected bolt of cloth carries plague from London to an isolated mountain village, a housemaid named Anna Frith emerges as an unlikely heroine and healer. Through Anna's eyes, we follow the story of the plague year, 1666, as her fellow villagers make an extraordinary choice. Convinced by a visionary young minister, they elect to quarantine themselves within the village boundaries to arrest the spread of the disease. But as death reaches into every household, faith frays. When villagers turn from prayers to murderous witch hunting, Anna must confront the deaths of family, the disintegration of her community, and the lure of illicit love. As she struggles to survive, a year of plague becomes instead Annus Mirabilis, a year of wonders. I've heard so many good things about this book. I would be very happy to finally get around to reading it for myself. It has a map. You know I love a book with a map. It just makes me happy. And the opening is Leaf Faff, 1666. Here is how the novel begins. Apple picking time. I used to love this season. The wood stacked by the door, the tang of sap still speaking of forest, the hay made all golden in the low afternoon light, the rumble of the apples tumbling into the cellar bins, smells and sights and sounds that said this year it would be all right. There'd be food and warmth for the babies by the time the snows came. I used to love to walk in the apple orchard at this time of the year, to feel the soft give underfoot when I trod on fallen fruit, thick, sweet scents of rotting apple and wet wood. This year, the hay stooks are few and the woodpile scant, and neither matters much to me. That is the opening of Year of Wonders by Geraldine Brooks. Now, I have been hoping to read Barbara Pym for a while because I've heard a lot of really good things about her, and I've heard comparisons to Jane Austen, Edith Wharton, other great female authors who cast a witty eye on society and foibles and have a little bit of romance involved. So my local used bookstore all of a sudden had like half a shelf of her books. And I did the sensible thing. I messaged Sean the Book Maniac and asked him which ones would be good. He sent me some of his favorites, and some of the books that they have were hardcovers and were significantly more expensive, so I decided to stick to paperbacks. So only one of his favorites was in paperback, and that was Cramped and Hodnet by Barbara Pym, which I am actually almost finished reading the day that I am filming this, and I'm really enjoying it a great deal. I also really love this sort of vintage looking cover. It is a little sun damaged on the side, so the color is kind of faded as you get to the spine of the book, but that's fine. And I'm just glad I have finally been trying Barbara Pym. Here's the quick description. This is published by Plume, this edition of it at least. This wryly elegant comedy of manners is a journey into quintessential Pym country. Written during the novelist's years at Oxford, Cramped and Hodnet is a previously unpublished, wickedly funny farce starring her famous clergymen, excellent women, dotty dons, ingenious students, assorted academic hangers-on, and a hilariously romantic plot revolving around a pair of eminently unsuitable attachments that fondly shows human nature at its height of foolishness. So far, I mean, it's more like an ensemble story than anything. There is a storyline or two storylines that serve as a sort of through line, but it's more about this cast of characters. So as they hinted at, this was actually, I think it was Barbara Pym's first book, or at least one of her first books, but it wasn't published until after she died. So characters from this book were sort of repurposed later on. So they are, if you're familiar with Barbara Pym, there are sort of callbacks to other books, which is funny because this was actually written first. And I have really been enjoying it a great deal, as I said. And another little quirk of this that I talked about in a Friday Reads is that every chapter opens with an illustration. I said in the Friday Reads that they all opened with the same illustration, but that's not actually true. It's tied to where one of the locations. So if the main-ish characters are at home, that is the illustration that you see. But it does move around a bit. So the next one is the Clevelands. So if it's ever at the Clevelands house, that is the illustration that you see. The reason this is important is that the next chapter was colored in, which I just find a little bit delightful. I think that is so cool, so sweet. I kind of want to color one of the pages in myself. I just have to finish the book and then I'll decide if I really want to, which I think I will, and which one I would like to do. So that was just a fun little surprise right there. But let's do a little bit from the opening of this book. Chapter 1 is called Sunday Tea Party. It was a wet Sunday afternoon in North Oxford at the beginning of October. The laurel bushes which bordered the path leading to Leamington Lodge, Banbury Road, were dripping with rain. A few sodden chrysanthemums, dahlias, and zinnias drooped in the flower beds on the lawn. The house had been built in the 60s of the last century of yellowish brick, with a gabled roof and narrow Gothic windows set in frames of ornamental stonework. A long red and blue stained glass window looked onto a landing halfway up the pitch pine staircase, and there were panels of the same glass let into the front door, giving an ecclesiastical effect, so that except for a glimpse of unlikely lace curtains, the house might have been a theological college. That is the opening of Crampton Hodnet by Barbara Pym. To explain the title, so someone is sort of caught in what he perceives to be an embarrassing situation, and instead of telling the truth, he makes up a story that he had been visiting a friend who was a vicar, and of course, the person he's speaking to follows up and says, "Oh, which vicar? What town?" And he makes up a town called Crampton Hodnet, and then feels like he needs to keep going with the pretense that Crampton Hodnet is a real place. Fun book. Can't wait to finish it. So, Sean also told me that a book that is not his favorite Barbara Pym, but which a lot of people like, is Excellent Women. And they had a copy of it. I almost didn't get it because this is a mass market. It's not really in great condition. Like, it's definitely readable, but it feels a little flimsier than the larger paperback, but I still got it. So this is described as a witty comedy about the complications of being a spinster, and a religious one at that. In the England of the 1950s, Mildred Lathbury is a clergyman's daughter, one of those excellent women who tend to get involved in other people's lives. She sees herself as capable of dealing with most of the stock situations of life: birth, marriage, death, the successful jumble sales, the garden fete spoiled by bad weather. Mildred, her new neighbors, Mr. and Mrs. Napier, and the vicar, Julian Mallory, have real qualities, beliefs, and a disarming sense of humor. So I'm probably going to try to read this at some point. I don't know if I'll try to do it this year, but I'm enjoying Crampton Hodnet enough that I might try to fit another one in. So this edition is from Perennial, and here is how it opens. Chapter 1. Ah, you ladies, always on the spot when there's something happening. The voice belonged to Mr. Mallet, one of our churchwardens, and its roguish tone made me start guiltily, almost as if I had no right to be discovered outside my own front door. That's the opening of Excellent Women by Barbara Pym. And then I went back because I had started Crampton Hodnet by this point and was enjoying it, and I knew that there had been another smaller paperback, same deal as Excellent Women. So these were like $1.75, so I decided to get them anyway, even though they are a little bit flimsy. And Quartet in Autumn is something that I believe Jen the Librarian had read last year and been enjoying, so I went back and I picked it up. This is described as the softly compelling story of human dignity in the midst of hopelessness. The novel presents us with Edwin, Norman, Letty, and Marcia, 4 elderly single people who work in the same office. Their work is their chief point of contact with each other and with society in general. The 2 women retire, an act that threatens the lives of all 4. Out of the tragic material of old age, Barbara Pym has made an almost musically perfect tale. So I'm looking forward to this. This edition is also from Perennial, you can tell, because it looks very similar to Quartet in Autumn. Chapter 1. That day the 4 of them went to the library, though at different times. The library assistant, if he had noticed them at all, would have seen them as people who belonged together in some way. They each in turn noticed him, with his shoulder-length golden hair. Their disparaging comments on its length, its luxuriance, its general unsuitability, given the job and the circumstances, were no doubt reflections on the shortcomings of their own hair. That is the opening of Quartet in Autumn by Barbara Pym. Cruising along, the Christmas Orphans Club was actually gifted to us at the end of December in 2023. It was gifted specifically to Joel by Marcia Johansson, who is a subscriber. Thank you, Marcia. This is published by Penguin as well. Joel read this in December and really liked it. I'm actually listening to this on audio at the time that I am filming this and enjoying it as well, although I am not very far through. I've been taking a slow approach to reading in 2024 so far, but this is a very cute book, and Joel loved it, and so far I am really enjoying it as well. Hannah and Finn have spent every Christmas together since college. Neither has anywhere else to go. Hannah's parents died, and Finn's disowned him when he came out. When the pair starts their adult lives in New York City, they add stylish Priya and mysterious Theo to the group, solidifying a found family and sense of belonging they've always craved. But now, when Finn announces a move to LA, this Christmas may be their last together. Hannah is terrified of losing the family she's built for herself, even as her boyfriend nudges her toward commitment. Meanwhile, Finn struggles with the things he's about to leave behind, namely his unexpressed feelings for Theo. Does growing up mean growing apart? This Christmas, the changes these friends fear may be exactly what they need. So you can see it's fun. It's also a great book to carry over into January. I know some people are already over Christmas. I'm never over Christmas. It lives in my heart all year round. So I'm the wrong person for that kind of message, but it has been a very sweet cinnamon bun-esque story so far. We open with a prologue. So let me just stay consistent, and we'll go to chapter 1, which is Hannah, Christmas number 1 in the year 2008. I, Hannah Gallagher, am kind of an expert on depressing playlists. Sure, it's a dumb superpower. I'd much rather be able to fly or read minds or turn into a puddle of metallic goo like Alex Mack, but we don't get to pick the hand we're dealt. Don't I know it? That is the opening of The Christmas Orphans Club by Becca Freeman. Thank you again to Marcia Johansson. And another book that I had already read and just wanted to have a copy of for myself is Fanny Herself by Edna Ferber. I had been looking for used copies all year long. I read this book about a year ago and loved it. Again, it was one of my favorite reads of 2023, and that best of video will be linked in the description box down below if you would like more about this book. So I kept looking for this book, and I found a lot of Edna Ferber books. I have a whole Edna Ferber section on my shelf right about here because I intend to read a lot more of her books. And she is in the Pulitzer Prize family of authors because she won for a subsequent novel called So Big, which I'm probably going to try to read this year. But I've been looking for a copy of Fanny Herself, which I loved and which I couldn't find. So finally, I just broke down, and actually a subscriber called Montana Book Company and left a gift card for me, and I cashed it in by saying, you know what, I would really just like a copy of Fanny Herself. So let me just order something new. I think this is a print on demand, but it's an attractive edition. A lot of the editions of Fanny Herself that are out there are not very pretty, being honest. Yeah, this is Mint Editions is the publisher of it. So basically, let me tell you what it says on the back. Growing up in a Jewish family in the small town of Winnebago, Fanny has always felt different. As she grows into a talented young woman, she longs for life beyond the family's store, hoping instead to become a professional artist. Before she does, however, she must prove her worth to her domineering mother. Fanny Herself is a novel by Edna Ferber. So Fanny goes out into the world, and the thing I really loved about this book is that 100 years after it was published, it still feels incredibly relevant to today's world, and I just absolutely loved it. And again, go to my best of 2023 for a lot more about Fanny Herself and about Tom Lake, but I just really adored this. Chapter 1. You could not have lived a week in Winnebago without being aware of Mrs. Brandeis. In a town of 10,000 where everyone was a personality, from Hen Cody, the drayman in blue overalls, magically transformed on Sunday mornings into a suave black broadcloth usher at the Congregational Church, to A.J. Dawes, who owned the waterworks before the city bought it, Mrs. Brandeis was a super personality. Winnebago did not know it. Winnebago, buying its dolls and china and Battenberg braid and tinware and toys of Mrs. Brandeis, of Brandeis's Bazaar, realized vaguely that here was someone different. That is the opening of Fanny Herself by Edna Ferber. I just love this book, and I'm really glad I have a copy of it for my shelf. The final book for this book haul, maybe a little silly, but I think it's going to be a lot of fun. So my sister actually sent it to me as a Christmas gift. It's The Inside Edge by Ashlyn Kane. It is a male-for-male romance. And the note, my sister had left a note on the outside that said, what if The Cutting Edge was a gay romance? And that is essentially the premise of this book. And now, if you're unfamiliar, The Cutting Edge is a movie from the early 1990s where a hockey player can't play hockey anymore because somehow he goes blind in one eye, I think, and that means he can't play hockey anymore. And he is paired with a female figure skater who can't find a partner because she has a really bad attitude and just doesn't play nice with other people. And then, of course, sparks begin to fly. So here's what this is about. What does a work-life balance look like to a recently retired professional athlete? Ex-hockey player Nate Overton is trying to find out, but dipping his toes in the gay dating scene post-divorce is a daunting prospect even without the news that his show is on thin ice. Before he can tackle either issue, he skates headfirst into another problem, his new co-host. Former figure skater Aubrey Chase is the embodiment of a spoiled rich playboy. He's also flamboyant, sharp, and hot as sin. Aubrey knows how important it is to get off on the right foot. He's just not very good at it outside of the rink. Having spent his life desperate for attention, he'll do anything to get it, even the wrong kind. For Nate and Aubrey, opposites don't so much attract as collide at center ice. But while Nate's everything Aubrey has scrupulously avoided until now, Aubrey falls suddenly head over heels and Nate's only looking for a rebound fling. Can Aubrey convince Nate to risk his heart again, or will their unexpected connection be checked at the first sign of trouble? For those who don't know, that's a hockey reference at the end and a pun, and I love it. Anyway, this is published by Dream Spinner Press, and let's read a little bit from the opening. Oh, and my sister bought it from the Ripped Bodice, which is a romance bookstore in New York City, supporting an independent bookstore, which I love. Here is the opening of this book. There's a prologue. Let's get to chapter 1 and just be consistent in this video. Chapter 1. Nate tipped his driver extra. The guy had made it from O'Hare in record time. He sidestepped around the office workers in the plaza like they were opposing defenders and entered the enormous revolving door as the big lobby clock struck the hour. It almost felt like beating the buzzer. He was going to just barely make it in time for makeup and a brief rundown, but barely was good enough and far better than he'd hoped after spending an hour waiting for a gate at the airport. The stress of being late, Nate hated tardiness in himself as much as in others, was only eclipsed by the situation at the network. That is the opening of The Inside Edge by Ashlyn Kane. Thank you to my sister for sending this to me for Christmas. If you have thoughts about any of these books, recommendations based on my interest in these or anything like that, let me know in the comment section down below. As always, I really appreciate your time, and I will be back. Until next time, happy reading.